white pines. And now this may seem sad at first, and it is, because a lot of people were forced to move into cities and to give up farming. But if you stayed, these white pines, which were historically very pesky and really annoying because they grew really fast and they would pop up on your pasture, they suddenly became really valuable because of these. So this is a white pine box, and we actually have one of these in our collection at Gore Place. There's this huge boom in box making, and that's because suddenly there was a huge glut of white pine, and of course, plastic wasn't a thing back then. So, storing things, you would do it in a box like this, and white pines became really valuable. So these farmers who were down on their luck got one last something from the land before they were forced to move on. And so now let's go back to Middlesex County. So this is the early 20th century. The UMass Field Station is built in Waltham, and it's now the Waltham Community Farm, and this is right down the street from us. And so small farms are continuing to produce a ton of food, and UMass, which was founded right before the Civil War as an agricultural college, is starting to invest in Eastern Massachusetts, because obviously UMass is in Amherst. So they want an Eastern Massachusetts field station, and they put one in Waltham because this is centrally located in Middlesex County, and a very agricultural county. And they start doing a lot of agricultural research here. They start developing some new breeds, including the Waltham butternut squash. So anywhere you see butternut squash, it comes back to Waltham. So the original Waltham butternut is sort of the granddaddy of all butternut squash. There are a lot of variations of it, but it does come back to Waltham. And this just goes to show how rural, or how agricultural this area was as late as the early and mid 20th century. So the landscape it's an industrial one, it's an urban one, but farmers are still thriving, and agricultural colleges are still investing in research in this area. And so now we'll see how farmland is declining here. So 1900, you start to see it fall. But again, farmland, even as farmland's declining, local farmers are meeting demand. There's still farmland's declining, but demand is not declining, and farmers who choose to stay on the farm are meeting demand. So even as the countryside starts to look like this, as this third growth forest starts to grow in after the farm has been abandoned and after the white pines have been cut, farmers can still do well if they specialize and if they live close to the city. And this is especially true during World War II. So a lot of people know the Victory Gardens in World War II, and the Victory Gardens are a big reason why Massachusetts was once again able to sort of turn back the clock a little bit and become an agricultural powerhouse in the 1940s. And that is because Massachusetts actually produced more food and made more money selling it than at any point in the state's history in 1945 and 1946. And that's because all of a sudden supply chains are upended, labor is scarce, people are fighting the war, but food still has to be grown. And even though much of the countryside looks like this, and while cities are expanding and sprawling, and Waltham has a lot of factories and it's really densely populated, there are still these market gardens. There are still what they're now calling Victory Gardens. There's still plenty of space that's being used, that's being effectively, efficiently used. People using land not as we do now, as sort of like ornamental or to look nice, but to be really productive and useful. And so here's the, let me zoom out a bit. So I think it cut off a bit, but the value of produce sold in Massachusetts. So you see, farmland was declining this whole time. I want to go back, but although it holds steady here in the 1940s, and that's because all of a sudden, I'm sorry, the picture got cut off, but this is dairy, eggs, vegetables, all this. It all skyrockets during World War II. And sadly, after World War II, there was really no way that Massachusetts farmers could compete any longer. And that's because transportation was just so much faster than ever before. Refrigeration was so much better. And so even those market gardens, even those really efficient farmers couldn't really compete anymore. And so the landscape starts to look something like this. So this is Moody Street. You see the old department stores. And then here is I-95. So the interstate highway system, they start building that in 1956. I-95 cuts right through Waltham. And of course, this means food can be transported much easier. And suddenly those farmers in Middlesex County don't have that advantage anymore. So this is what happens. So once again, the forest comes back. So the forest has been sort of marching back this entire time. And even as much of the city or much of the state is being taken over by trees again, farmers were doing well close to the city because they were being really efficient with their space. But once their comparative advantage is gone with new transportation, pretty much anywhere that's not a suburb or not a city that doesn't look like this, it starts to come back like this. And so the only thing left really is these old stone walls. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning. If you walk through the woods, and you can walk through the woods at Gore Place, you'll see we have these old stone walls. And if you're wondering how they got in the middle of the woods, it's because these woods weren't there. This was all farmland, and the farmers would take these stones that were lying in their fields that would come up every year because the process is called frost heaving. So when the temperature fluctuates on exposed soil, stones that are deep underground slowly make their way up as the temperature goes up and down, up and down. And then every spring, when the soil thaws, more rocks will come up. So farmers every year had to take these every spring and lug them to the side of their farm, and they would build these big walls on the edge of their property. And so that is why they're still there. All right. And so just a little recap. So you can see sort of the dichotomy here. So at its peak, at the peak of agriculture, at least space-wise, the state looks like this. Most of Massachusetts is cleared. Most farmers are growing most of what they need for themselves, or they're specializing in something, trying to make some more money. And then over time, they start to specialize a bit more because it's hard to compete with bigger farms. And then some farmers just can't keep up at all. And so they abandon their farms, and the trees start to grow back. And then, before you know it, we're getting all our food from, we get most of our vegetables from California. We get most of our dairy from the Great Lakes region. And there's still, and I'll talk about this on the next slide, there's still a lot of great local producers, and there's a lot of progress being made with that. But overwhelmingly, the state has been retaken by the forest, and really the only remnants of our agricultural past are sort of these old stone walls that you'll see in the woods. But like I said, there is reason to be hopeful, and Gore Place and other farms in Waltham are leading the way. So this is the Waltham Community Fields Farm here on the right, which is actually at the site of the old UMass Waltham Field Station that I mentioned earlier. And then here's Gore Place on the left, and we raise sheep and a whole bunch of crops. And let me see. So this combination of productive open space, like you see here, and also these woods, like we have at Gore Place, that's sort of the ideal, in my opinion, landscape, because we do have this agricultural history, and it's not something necessarily we should go back to, because as we can see just how much space it took up, and how many species and habitats were destroyed. But I think there's a happy medium somewhere, and today we have about 60% of our state is forested. That's more than double what it was in the mid 19th century. And I think there is plenty of space to grow local food. We have the capacity, like we saw in World War II. We have the labor and if we have the will, we're more than capable of growing enough food to feed, or growing enough food to feed our region. Yeah, so there is reason to be hopeful, but at the same time, I hate to end it this way, but each year thousands of acres in Massachusetts are lost to development like this, and this is called hard deforestation. So while farming back in the 19th century is more of a soft deforestation, because as we see, the forest has returned, hard deforestation, forest doesn't come back as easily. This building, it's hard to say what will happen to concrete and to asphalt. It's definitely a much longer process, and I think as we look ahead and think about how we build a more sustainable and healthier state and community. We need to think about sort of the footprint we're leaving. And if you're passionate about the environment and you want to live in a healthier, more beautiful, more sustainable community, and who doesn't, I recommend you check out Wildlands and Woodlands. And they do a lot of great work. So they're actually part of Harvard Forest, which did the dioramas here.